Finance industry's explanation of our financial crisis is that there was a weird, unpredictable combination of events, a perfect storm of macroeconomic forces, with benefit of hindsight perhaps. Perhaps they loaned not wisely but too well, but certainly none of their business practices were really blameworthy. I don't claim to have seen the collapse of the whole world's financial system coming, but I knew that the mortgages that had proven toxic for the finance industry were toxic for homeowners, and I thought that was reason enough to act. Mr. Watt and I introduced legislation 6 years ago that would have forbidden the mortgage practices that have brought our nation's economy to grief. We will hear the same arguments today. We already have the same arguments today that we have heard for 6 years from an entirely unrepentant industry. All the mortgage terms that may appear abusive or predatory to the unsophisticated were really based on risk, they argue. And without those practices, lenders would not be able to make credit available to people who needed it. We know you mean well, the industry said, but your legislation will just hurt the very people you're trying to help. And they said we needed to be careful. We didn't pass well-meaning but poorly crafted legislation that would have unintended consequences. It's hard to argue in favor of sloppy, careless legislation, but the nation and the world would have been better off if Congress passed a bill that we drafted on a napkin. During the subprime heyday from 2004 to 2006, when the toxic mortgages were made, profits in the finance industry metastasized to more than 40% of all corporate profits. That's after the vulgar compensation and all the perks that we've heard so much about in the last few months. Maybe the industry's margins were not really so tight after all. Maybe some of the mortgage terms that appeared predatory on their face really were. This committee will soon consider legislation to address systemic risk in the financial industry, to protect the industry from getting itself into such trouble again. But we need to do more than just keep the masters of the universe from running with scissors again in the future. We need to reform consumer lending practices that have trapped millions of working and middle-class families hopelessly in debt, practices that have pushed millions of Americans out of the middle class and into poverty.